Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and I am a Canadian knitter living in the beautiful, and today quite stormy in a dramatic fun way, northeast of England. And I only have two works in progress to talk to you about today, but I have a fair bit to say about both of them, the second one in particular, and I wanted to show them to you before I got too much farther along, because on the first I've made quite a bit of progress, and the second I realized I actually haven't shown you yet, so I have lots to talk about. I really need to show that to you. So let's dive right in. So the first of the two works in progress that I have to talk to you about today is one that you've seen before, and it is the Caledonia by Sylvia Cherry. And I've made a lot of progress on this, actually. I feel like I told you, the last time I showed this to you, I kind of said, oh, and now I've reached the, the stitch pattern where it's kind of like 1 by 1 rib. It's broken. But in practice, you're switching the yarn back and forth between the needles for every stitch, so I'm probably going to slow down. And then I didn't. I think partially because saying that out loud, I kind of thought afterwards, there's no reason to slow down. It's knit at such a big gauge. If I just sit down and do it, it'll go really quickly. And it has. So I had shown you, I think I was done the back, or just about done the back, and I have since, oh no, this is the back. I was done the back, or just about done the back, and I have since completely done the front, and I've started on the sleeves. Sorry, this is all knotted up. I am knitting the sleeves 2 at a time, and that is going really well. And I've done the cable chart, and am now just onto the regular stitch pattern for the sleeves. So really, I wanted to show this to you before I kind of finish it. I think if I sit down and power through for a few days again, that'll be this sweater done. I will have to seam it up, and I'm a bit nervous about that. So I'll talk to you about that. But I wanted to show you first. So I don't have a lot to say about the front. The front was knit exactly the same way the back is knit up until where you start decreasing for sleeves. If you have not seen this before, the Caledonia pattern is knit, they call, and I didn't say this last time, I'm sorry, bad podcaster, but it's knit with a DK weight yarn. I'm using an Aran weight yarn, and in fact, even with an Aran weight yarn, I am knitting at a slightly tighter gauge than Sylvia Cherry calls for. I believe she calls for, in a DK weight woolen spun yarn, 18 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. In this is kind of the standard stitch pattern of the garment. I'm at 19 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and one of the reasons I'm knitting off gauge, I'm happy with the fabric it's giving me, especially when it's blocked. This will settle and puff out a bit and relax. It will be bigger than it is now, but one of the reasons that I'm tighter on gauge is not actually my preference for tighter fabric in this case. It's that I wanted less positive ease than the pattern was offering at the size that it would make sense for me to knit. So I'm knitting the size medium, and it will come in a bit smaller, less positive ease. And part of that is because I first encountered this pattern by watching Katie Greenbean's podcast, and many years ago actually they knit this garment, and they knit it with significantly less positive ease. And maybe it's just because that's the way I first encountered the pattern, but I just really liked the way that fit on them. I'm sure that mine will not fit the same way on me, because I'm just, doing my own math to figure out how it's going to fit, but I'm hoping that will work out really well. I love this pattern. I really love that pattern. It's just beautiful, and it's so much fun to knit. And I believe I mentioned last time, but even with having problems with my hands, and I want to knit nothing but texture right now, and I think probably there's a kind of childish defiance in me that wants to knit a lot of texture, because my hands don't like a lot of texture, is particularly cabling. Purling and knitting is fine, but cabling is hard on my hands. This though wasn't too bad, because as you can see, there's lots of space in between the cables, and every all the wrong side rows are just knitting and purling, so you get lots of rest rows. This really helped me scratch the itch for wanting to do cables without putting my hands through too much stress or, you know, tension or torque or any of that. So I did still have to take more breaks than is usual for me where my hands are right now, but it was fun and I'm really pleased that I was able to do it. So I don't have a lot to say to you about the front and the back. I am knitting this exactly to pattern, which is a little bit unusual for me. When it came to the sleeves, let me sort out all my all my ends for you. When it came to the sleeves, I found the pattern holds your hand a little bit less, and I'm very grateful that I remembered, because it doesn't actually signal in the pattern where you're actually following what you do for the sleeves. It doesn't reiterate this, but it does say at the beginning of the pattern where it's listing, you know, gauge and materials, it marks down that you need, you know, your whatever needle you are using to get your pattern gauge, which I believe that in this case I'm actually using the same size needle as the pattern stipulates, which is a 4mm needle. So you need a 4mm needle in general for the body of this garment. You need a 3.75mm for the twisted ribbing, which I again really did not enjoy doing because it's double twisted. Single twisted rib I don't think I mind too much, but something about double twisted rib. Anyways, it looks good though, and it really, you know, I wanted to get the vision of the sweater as Sylvia Watts Cherry had it, because I think it is just a gorgeous design. So I did it, but I'm glad it's over. Up in those list of materials though, she also stipulates that you need to go up one size, so 4.5mm needles, just for the cabling section on the sleeves, for nothing else. And I was hesitant to do this. So as I started to cast on the sleeves, I kind of went, oh, like there's nothing about that here. Have I made that up? And I went back to the beginning of the pattern, and no, it does stipulate that. And I didn't want this cable section to be bigger than the cable section on the body of the garment, so I was really, really hesitant. But in every other case where I have been not sure with this pattern, following Sylvia Watts Cherry's advice has been the right way to go. So I did it. And I am so glad that I did it, because I think that in this case it might actually be to help just with the stitch counts, because I think this sleeve would have been way too small if I hadn't gone up. So it's not going to be the easiest to show you. Sorry, I'm wearing a snug merino base layer that I'm not going to be able to pull up all the way. But this is going to be a snug sleeve, and I knew I was knitting this with less positive ease that this would be snug. So I knew that it was going to be snug sleeves. And again, my swatch really settled and gained width. So I am expecting this to settle out a little bit, but look at this. It is pretty snug. It's not the easiest to show you. But if I had done a 4mm needle, I think this would not have fit, and I would have had to go back to redo it. So again, very pleased that I followed Sylvia Watts Cherry's advice. I think there's just a mantra of follow her in all things. That said, I'm wondering if I've found an error in the chart, or not an error, but maybe just a me preference. I'm honestly not 100% sure, and I haven't emailed her or anything like that because I am not confident that my way of doing it is better. But I will try. I will take some photos to put it up in case this is really hard to see here, but I wanted to try to show you. And I remember noticing this on the back and thinking, oh, maybe I'll do it a different way for the front. And I completely forgot. So the sleeve is going to have 2 stitches different than the front and the back in the cable sections. But you know what? I think it's so minor that it doesn't matter. I think the only reason I made the change so that it's not consistent across the body and the sleeves is just like satisfying my own curiosity to see what it would look like. And it's so subtle, I'm very happy for them to be different. But let me see if I can show you. I'm just going to move my cup of tea my now cold cup of tea so that I don't drip my fiber in it. But I don't know if you can see that, so these twisted lines, these twisted stitch lines come out of this central diamond motif. And at the bottom they go in pretty seamlessly. And at the top they come out seamlessly on this side, but on this side there's just a purl bump there. Is that going to be visible? There's a little purl bump. And I didn't want that little purl bump there. So what it amounted to was taking two stitches, with one on top of the other, a right side and a wrong side, and making those knit stitches instead of purl stitches. And you can tell my cabling is much messier when I'm leaning this way than when I'm leaning that way, which I think is really interesting. That will block out. I've seen that with past cabling in my work, and I know that it will block out, but it bugs me a bit this way. So what it amounts to is, I think it looks more symmetrical. And this one actually looks wonky just because the stitches are a bit wonky. So anyways, I'm pleased with that. I don't know that it matters. And I think probably the only person who would ever notice that is the person who knit the garment. I'd actually be a bit weirded out if anyone else ever noticed that on my sweater, because you have to be looking really, really closely, especially in a woolen spun yarn like this one, where everything is just a bit more fuzzy and a bit less defined. But I got some satisfaction out of playing with that and having a go, so that was really good. I don't think I have a ton else to say to you about this. Oh, except about seaming up. That's what I wanted to talk about. So I'm nervous about the seaming up of this. Not because of the sewing. I think the sewing will be fine. But I've never seamed up anything with sleeves before. And I feel like I always hear people online I do a lot of, as I'm sure do lots of other people, I do a lot of reading kind of like knitting forums and things, just seeing how other people do certain techniques and what other people like, and just trying to learn from other people, I guess. And I feel like I often see people talking about how they far prefer garments that are knitted flat and then seamed together because they have so much more control. And I definitely understand how you have more control over each of the individual pieces, and it's a bit more like sewing, so you can make changes in a similar way. And certainly, like in a circular yoke, you're not going to be able to do much about shoulder fit, right? Like it's going to fit the way it's going to fit. You can, make it smaller or change where the increases are a little bit depending on the pattern, but definitely you have less control that way. I understand that. But I'm a bit nervous about, so I knit the body to a slightly different length. No, I didn't. I followed the pattern exactly. Okay. I'm probably going to have just cut myself off because I was talking around in circles, and I remembered I was anxious, but I couldn't remember exactly why, and I had to talk myself around in a little bit of a circle to remember, but I remember now. The reason that I'm anxious, I have followed the pattern exactly, but the pattern gets to a point where, like so many patterns, and in a way that makes lots of sense because most of our row gauges, row gauge matters less than stitch gauge in most cases. My row gauge is definitely not the same as Sylvia Wet's-Cherry's row gauge, so I'm grateful that she's written it this way. But it gets to a point where you go, knit, continue in pattern until the body measures this length. Then continue, once you've done the armhole decreases, continue straight with the armholes once they've been decreased until that section measures however many centimeters. What makes me nervous about that is that the number of stitches I have, I'm holding up my hands as if I don't have the exact the actual thing to show you. So what makes me nervous about that is whether or not the number of stitches here are going to match up with the number of stitches on the arm side on the sleeve. And I'm a bit nervous about seaming up if the stitch counts don't match up exactly, because I've never done that before. Obviously, I'm going to block all of the pieces first and try to sort all of that out, but I guess I'm also nervous about the blocking, because then you'll have to make sure that you block it so that those are the same size. It's just newness. It's just newness is what it is. So I'm sure it will be fine, and I will report back. And in typical me fashion, I'll probably be like, oh yeah, it was fine. I don't know why I was nervous about it. But yeah, I was having a conversation with a friend about knitting and you know, tackling new things like spinning and weaving and things like that. And she and I were chatting about how, or through the process of chatting, we realized that I'm always nervous about things. I always think it's going to be really difficult. And then most of the time when I get there, I'm like, oh, it's okay, it was fine. And she's kind of the opposite. She usually thinks, oh, how hard could it be? And then she gets there and she's like, oh, maybe I should have taken this a little bit more seriously. And I think probably we're both coming at it with the same, like, we're both experiencing, sorry, we're both experiencing the same level of difficulty, but maybe just our mindset is a bit different going in. And I don't think one or the other is better, but that's where I am. I'm in the, I'm sorry about my throat. I'm not sure what's going on there. Oh, there we go. So I'm sure that that's just where I am with that stage, and it will be okay. Sorry, it's a little off today, I don't know why. And it will be okay once I get there, but I am a little bit nervous about it. So I will, if anyone has any advice, I am more than open to advice about seaming things and seaming things where the stitch counts might not match up exactly. I imagine that it's just a process of, well, maybe I'll do exactly what I would do if it was sewing, and I'll kind of find a way to pin it around together so that I've got it like that. That's what I don't want, is to put one of the sleeves in wonkily or something like that, because I'm not, or maybe I'll count around and count the number of stitches on each and figure out a ratio the way that you would if you were picking up stitches and you didn't need a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm sure that there are ways to go about it. Again, if you have a tried and tested way that is, you think, better than others, please do share. But I will report back about that, because I have a feeling that the next time I talk to you about this, I'll be on my way. Yeah, because it really, once I sat down and started working on it seriously, this went super quickly because it is knit at a very big gauge. So, okay, so I've had a bit more, I had some hot tea, some still hot tea. I mean, what I had in this room had gone cold while I was talking. I had some more hot tea, I rested a bit, hopefully that, a number of my conditions or comorbidities can prevent as cold or flu-like symptoms even when I do not have a cold or a flu. So clearly I'm having some throat stuff right now. That's new. I've not had that before. Chronic illness, keeping things exciting by always throwing new symptoms at you. Just as you get used to one set of symptoms, there are more. So hopefully my voice will stick with us a bit more during this segment. I hope it's okay that I'm being stubborn and I'm just going to power through even if my voice does go a bit funny. I have no soreness or anything like that. And I'm feeling good, and I want, I'm up. I've showered recently. My hair looks reasonably presentable, and I have energy to talk. Those conditions don't all happen at the same time often enough for me to forego this because my throat's being a bit funny. So I hope that's okay. Sorry, I'm saying all of this because I'm frustrated with my throat. The second garment that I want to talk to you about, as you can see, is another iteration of the garment I'm wearing today. So I'm knitting myself another Hesper cardigan. I talked to you in the, this is the Estelle Eco Worsted Shetland. I'm sure I've rearranged some of those, but as always, I'll put all the information in the description. And I was torn, in my 2026 knitting plans video, I was torn and talking to you about whether I would knit this into a Bonnie cardigan by Orlan Souche, or if I would do another Hesper cardigan, but this time very low contrast. And I actually initially decided to do the Bonnie cardigan, and I did all the math. I had a swatch in this yarn that gave me a 20 stitch gauge, and the Bonnie cardigan is knit at 16 stitches, so fairly different. And I sat down and I did all the math, and I even cast on and got like an inch in before I had a thought that made me pull it out and do the Hesper cardigan. And my thought was basically that I would get to do some fun math. Not really, but kind of, and I'll explain. My thought was that I would get to do some fun math because, and I thought that this would be, I'm wearing this on purpose today because when I kind of talked to you about all of my knitting last year, I talked about how happy I was with this cardigan, and I talked about the yarn a little bit, but there is a phenomena where the farther I get from something, the less I remember the things that frustrated me about it. I've seen lots of other podcasters talk about this too. I'm sure that this is true for lots of us with our making, and I think that that's generally a very good thing, right? Because we're definitely sometimes too close to things and too hard on ourselves about like little details that don't actually matter, right? There's you know, wanting to do well and have your work represent your knitting in a positive way, and then there's being perfectionists, and I can definitely err on the side of being a perfectionist in a way that takes some of my own happiness away from the making process. So good to know that the farther I get from things, the more reasonable I am about them, and I try to remind myself of that to try to let go of some of the things that don't matter while I'm knitting. But I am glad that I have another opportunity to talk about this sweater, because I think in a way that is not true of anything else I've ever shown you, there are actually some construction things in this garment that I'm not thrilled with. And I think part of the reason that I didn't, that I let go of that and didn't think to talk about it is because I knit this off gauge, I'm often knitting off gauge, and I know that some of the issues that I'm having might arise from the fact that I'm knitting off gauge, so they might be my fault. Other people knitting this pattern at the gauge that is stipulated might not have this issue. But I've been thinking about it more, and as I'm working on my new version, I think that that might not be true. I think actually what is happening is, in order to get that gauge, so this garment calls for sport weight yarn, and it is knit at a gauge of, oh, I'm gonna double check myself, I think it's 22 stitches. Yes, 22 stitches and 29 rows, which to me is a loose gauge for a sport weight yarn. I think that what is happening with the sample and with other people's projects, where I'm not seeing the issue that bugs me about mine, is that they've pinned it out, is my guess. And that will, you know, that's going to help to get a 22 stitch gauge in a sport weight yarn, but it will also have solved some of these issues. So I've taken some very, while I was resting my voice, I took some very aesthetic pictures of myself in the bathroom mirror so that you can hopefully see some of this a bit more clearly. But my issue is, see the way that and this is, there we go, help you see the blue, not against the blue chair. So what bugs me is the way that it puckers here on the sleeve, and it does this on both sleeves and on the back. Now part of that, I mean, it's really sticking out because that's the fold line of where I blocked this, but I don't know if you can see, let's show there. There is also a set of increases right here. And you do the increases, I think it's at 6 places around the yoke. So there's one in the front and in the back, and right, so you do these increases. And I don't tend to stretch my knits. I did end up stretching this one a little bit to try to counter that because it was really, really puckering out and back as I was knitting, and I was really bothered by that. So it's much more subtle now, and I'm not so bothered by it. I also, you know, like I knit this really big and comfy, and it's a sitting around home kind of sweater. It is starting to pill. I had also talked about how I was worried about the yarn pilling. It is starting to pill, not massively, but considering how little I'm moving around, it is starting to pill. That was a drops yarn. So, and I had read that that might be an issue. So part of me thinks maybe I'll re-knit, because I love this color combination so much. So part of me thinks maybe I'll re-knit this color combination at some point in the future. But in the short term, I thought that I could have a go at eliminating this issue in this version. And what I've decided to do, and had a lot of fun with actually, because the math was quite straightforward once I got my head around what I wanted to do, and it was actually quite straightforward. So what I've done is I have made this into a so it's a circular yoke, I would say, at the top, and then instead of continuing on as a circular yoke with the increases divided evenly around the whole yoke, I've turned it into a raglan construction after the end of the mosaic colorwork. And I'm really, really pleased with it. It's fitting great. As you can see, I'm also making this one much smaller. I'm making way less positive ease, partially just to make it feel like a very different sweater from this one, so that I have two fairly different Hesper cardigans in my wardrobe. But I'm really pleased. As you can see in back now, it's nice and even because there are no increases going around. It's puckering a little bit because, of course, the tension is always going to be a bit different between the mosaic colorwork and the stockinette stitch, but that will resolve with blocking. I'm not worried about that at all. And I love the fit. I love the way that these increases are changing the kind of fit and construction of the garment after the mosaic colorwork. So I was quite intimidated about the idea of doing this. I feel like I had heard, I wish I could remember now, but I watched some podcast at some point of someone who knits and does a podcast primarily about their own design work, and they were talking about doing this the circular yoke and then doing raglan increases afterwards, and they were talking about how it took them quite a while to get their head around it, and the math was quite tricky. And that was the first time that I'd heard about this kind of idea of doing combined circular yoke and raglan yoke. I have come across it a few other places. I've seen it in a couple of project descriptions. I've never knit one though. And I was a bit intimidated just because I'd heard this designer say that it was tricky to get her head around. But it wasn't at all tricky in this case because, of course, someone else has already done all the grading work, right? There was no grading involved in this. It was just figuring out how to redistribute the increases. And that was actually fairly straightforward. So the way that I did that is kind of the first thing that I had that, you have to decide if you're going to do this kind of thing is to figure out where you're going to put your stitch markers that you will do the increases around. And the way that I did that was I compared my total stitch count as I finished the mosaic colorwork. So you finish the mosaic colorwork and then you do, I think, 2 rows of just even stockinette. So I took that stitch count and I compared it to the stitch count at the point when you are dividing for sleeves. So obviously not taking into account any stitches that you cast on under the arms. But, and it's just got sunny, so my light is changing. And use those as a proportion, right? So, and I'm not going to remember the exact proportions, but it's something like, let's say the sleeves are where you cast off, the sleeves are 20% of the total stitch count at that point, not counting anything that you cast on under the arms. Then I made the sleeves up here 20% of my total stitch count up here. I have, in an effort to both remember things that I'm thinking about while I'm knitting, even if I'm not filming as often, and to keep better notes for myself, I am making an effort to keep better notes on my Ravelry projects. And I have written all of this out, like how I did all of this out on the project page. So if the way that I'm describing this verbally is super confusing to you, and I apologize, I feel like I am probably clearer in writing. I mean, I think I'm always clear in writing, but that is on my Ravelry page. So if that would be better for you than listening to this, please do feel free to go look at that if you're interested. Basically, I'm sharing that because I'm worried that I'm talking myself around in circles and I'm going to confuse people more than anything else. But so basically just taking a 20%, 20%, 30%, 30%, putting my stitch markers, that's pretty straightforward. Then you're kind of just working a regular raglan. The next thing that I had to decide was how many raglan increases I was going to do. And to do that, again, the math was pretty straightforward because someone else has already done all of this grading for you, right? And so what I did there was I took the total number of stitches when you separate for sleeves, the total number of stitches when you separate for sleeves, again, not including anything you cast on under the arms, just the 2 sleeves and the back and the 2 fronts. And I subtracted from that number the total up here, right? So you're getting the difference in the number of stitches. Then you take that difference and divide it by 8. The reason you're dividing by 8 is because, right, typical raglan structure is going to be increasing 8 stitches each round. So divide by 8. Then you take that number, see, this is where it might be easier written down. Then you take that number, right, so that's the number of raglan increases that you want to do, and I divided that by 2. The reason I divided that by 2 is, like in kind of what I would call a standard raglan construction, I wanted to be able to do a round of increases and then a round where you knit straight with no increases. A round of increases, a round knit straight. A round of increases, a round knit, maybe even is a better word, right? A round knit even. The reason I made that calculation is I wanted to make sure that the raglan increases would work in this case without putting my armhole, you know, down below my rib cage. I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be too long. So then I took that number, let's say, I can't remember what my specific number was, but let's say it's 10, right? Let's say that you need to do 5 rounds of raglan increases. Mine was definitely more than that, but let's say 5 rounds of raglan increases. You divide that, you multiply that by 2, so you're going to do 10 rounds minimum before you divide for sleeves. Then what I did was I compared, sorry, this sounds all complicated in sequence, but it is actually really straightforward. So I took that number, 10 rounds, 10 rows, and I compared it to my swatch and figured out how many centimeters that was going to be. And actually, I don't know if you can see here, but my raglan increases stopped well before my sleeves, so I got to knit some rounds just even, and that worked out really, really well. This might be different depending on the different size, right? The number of raglan increases you're going to need to do is going to be different for each size of the pattern, and in some sizes maybe it would make your arm side drop too low. In that case, I think what I would have done would be to hide some increases elsewhere in the yoke, a bit like this, but then you could be a bit more strategic about where you put them based on where it would make the most sense on your own body to have increases, and I wouldn't put them all in a row the way that they are here, or the way that they are in a raglan increase, right? I would distribute them a bit more subtly. So I think that that's very doable, and honestly might be something I do in other garments in the future if I encounter something where the colorwork motif on the circular yoke stops well before you separate for sleeves, because I am so much happier with this fit. And I know that not everyone, there are people who have issues with every type of sweater construction, aren't there? But I know that lots of people have issues with a raglan fit on their body. I tend to like a raglan fit on myself. I tend to find that they fit quite well. So that is a substitution that I will do again. And I already know that my mom would really like a Hesper cardigan in the future, so I will be doing this for her again as well. If I reknit myself one in these colors or in other bright colors, I will definitely do that again. This is a garment that I really love. I find myself thinking about different color combinations for this one a lot. I think that this motif is genius. I really like it. So I'm really pleased that I've figured that out, and because I think I will make use of it again in the future. I have been hesitant a few times about whether this was the right choice with this yarn. I think partially because as we're going into spring, I'm wanting to wear slightly lighter and brighter things, and the black yarn makes this feel not very springtimey to me. But I do definitely have some summery clothes that I think I could wear this with. And also I don't really, there is a way in which, we had sunshine and now we're having rain. It's a really exciting weather day here today. There is a way in which, I don't know if anyone else finds this, I think knitting my own garments, or I'm sure sewing your own garments, I'm not doing any sewing these days, but makes me think kind of too hard about my clothes sometimes, or I get too myopic, too focused in. I don't generally think about my wardrobe according to seasons very much, especially not living in the UK where the seasons are not nearly as distinct as they are at home. I don't tend to divide my wardrobe that way too much. So thinking about this according to seasons was a bit odd for me. So I did have moments of, oh, maybe I should have done the bonnie cardigan, but I have other yarn that I'm intending to do for a bonnie cardigan, so I will still get to knit that garment. And I think this was really worth it in this case. So yeah, I basically wanted to show it to you before I got too far along. Really, I wanted to show it to you before I separated for sleeves, but I just wasn't feeling well, so I kept going. I hope that's okay. I did take a picture of it before I divided for sleeves, so you can kind of see the numbers, and maybe I'll put it up here. My voice is going again. I took a picture with stitch markers at the points where I was going to put my raglan increases, just so you can see that. The color in that picture is terrible. It makes it look like almost a kind of turquoisey yarn. I'm really not sure why, because this is definitely a greeny green, leaning even on a yellow side. So anyways, if the color isn't showing well, I'll put up a picture so that you can see the color better. But yeah, very, very pleased about that. I hope I haven't confused you too much with the math. I'm a bit flustered by my voice, and I just launched into that a bit flustered, which is probably not the best way to talk about sweater math, but really quite straightforward. It's written down on my Ravelry page if that is more helpful, and yeah, very, very pleased about that. So good to keep going. Okay, so that is everything I wanted to talk to you about today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that this format, where I'm not talking to you about everything that's on my needles every time I film one of these videos, is working okay for you. From my side, I think it's working really well. It's really helping me to be able to accommodate the fact that I can't control when I'm going to be up for filming, and it's keeping me from, sometimes I'm filming these fairly close together actually when I'm feeling well, and I don't want to give you I've knit another inch and a half of this. So it's helping me to not be too repetitive, I guess. But I think it's also hopefully allowing me to focus in more and kind of save projects for when I have something interesting to say about them, which feels good on my end. I hope that that's translating over for you as well. I hope I wasn't too rambly today. I definitely feel like I let I got flustered by my voice doing funny things, and then I let the flusteredness transfer over into talking about my knits. But anyways, I'm the kind of person who gets flustered, so that's what we get, I guess. Anyways, I hope that you are well as the world continues to be challenging and frightening. I hope that your neighbors are well. I hope your community is well, and I hope that your knitting or your crafting is bringing you comfort. I know that mine is certainly bringing me a lot of comfort. And I am thinking of you and wishing you well, and I will see you next time.